Hi, my name is Andrew Crapo. A little less than 3 years ago, I decided to run for the Scotia-Glenville Board of Education. Scotia-Glenville is a K12 public school district of a little over 2,600 students in upstate New York. Since that time, I have been learning about public education in a variety of ways, seeking to understand where we are, how we got here, and in what direction we might want to go in the future. This talk is a summary of some of the things that I have learned and come to believe on this topic. It is a remake of a Lunch and Learn talk that I gave at the GE Global Research Center in Niskayuna, New York on January 15, 2013. It is widely perceived that public education in the United States, and certainly in New York State, is in crisis. The economic downturn of the past several years has been a double whammy for New York schools. First, as the state has seen its revenues suddenly diminished, it has responded by significantly decreasing state aid to schools. Furthermore, the state has imposed a cap on the rate of increase in property taxes, the primary funding mechanism of public education. It has also placed a cap on increases in state aid to school districts. Consequently, schools are cutting programs and staff at perhaps unprecedented rates, and many schools are facing the possibility of no longer being able to offer an accredited academic program, let alone the wide variety of popular optional programs such as sports, music, and accelerated classes. My discussion today is broken down into 3 parts: looking backward to see how we got here, taking a look at some indicators of where we are, and finally looking forward at what might be coming in the not-too-distant future. Let's take a look backwards in time. The tug-of-war between the desire for public education and concern over how to fund it is not new. Thomas Jefferson and Noah Webster were among early advocates who believed that a literate society was a necessity if the fledgling democracy were to endure. Public education was also seen as a way of inculcating recent immigrants with American values, thereby creating a more cohesive society. Thomas Jefferson's proposals in his home state of Virginia were rejected because they were deemed too costly. Horace Mann is known as the father of American education. He was appointed Secretary of State in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1837. In 1839, he led successful efforts to create the first teacher college in the nation and the first mandatory school attendance requirement, 6 months of every year. However, his longest-lasting impact came when he visited Prussia in 1843 at his own expense and studied their system of compulsory attendance, grade levels, and specific teacher training. This form of education was adopted in Massachusetts, and the rest of the country followed suit. This gave rise to the modest one-room schoolhouse with its single teacher. There are several one-room schools within a few miles of our home. They were located close enough together that children could walk or ride horse or carriage to school. Students studied their lessons, recited what they had learned to the teacher, and older children helped to teach younger children. Younger children who are quick to learn often listen to the older children's lessons, providing opportunities for acceleration. As letters from ordinary soldiers during the Civil War attest, many Americans of that era were well read. By the 1890s, the initial goal of preserving democracy and inculcating democratic values were augmented with additional purpose. The rapid rise of industrial Germany caused concern that the U.S. would not maintain competitiveness on the world stage, a theme to be repeated periodically to the present day. The goal shifted to preparing everyone for a vocation. In fact, some argued that developing the faculties of the mind was quaint and irrelevant. So public schools were given a new job, and the significance of that change is reflected in some numbers. In 1905, only 1/3 of those starting first grade entered high school, and only 1/3 of those entering high school finished high school. In contrast, by 1930, 3/4 of those starting first grade entered high school, and 45% of those finished. This represented a dramatic increase in the number of students in public schools. It is perhaps not surprising that this demand was met by adopting a mass production style of education, with content distributed to large numbers of students by a teacher-lecturer and a standardized curriculum. The trend of increasing enrollment continued, with the number of high school students expanding tenfold from 1930 to 1970. It was during this time period that the many one-room schoolhouses in New York State were replaced by the central school districts of today. Large new buildings were constructed to accommodate the greatly increased number of students. At the national level, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 made it clear that all children were to be given access to public education. In 1957, the second wave of competitive angst burst on the American psyche when the Soviets launched Sputnik. Once again, the country turned to the public schools and education as a way to ensure that the nation was not left behind. However, another new goal was emerging for the schools. This is illustrated by the number of different course offerings across the U.S. In 1890, there were just 9 different courses, while by 1973, there were 2,100 different offerings. The new job of the public school was to offer something for everyone. The additions included sports, kindergarten, clubs, and many new subjects, and the trend has continued. This chart shows that from 1970 to 2012, student enrollment increased by only 8%, while the staff employed to deliver the educational program increased by 84%. The greatest increases occurred in the non-teaching staff. Something for everyone has come with a dramatic increase in the cost of public education. Angst about American competitiveness with the rest of the world was renewed in the late 1960s by the perceived threat of Japanese companies. In the 1980s, Americans learned that SAT scores had been in decline since 1963. The 1983 landmark report entitled "A Nation at Risk" confirmed our worst fears. And one of the books that I will cite in this talk is entitled "The Global Achievement Gap." One response to these concerns has been an increasing effort to hold students, teachers, and schools more accountable. To the dismay of many, this has taken the form of standardized tests. Initially, the emphasis was on average scores, and school only needed to bring up the average to demonstrate improved performance. New goals have been given to our nation's schools in the past decade. In a significant expansion of the role of the federal government, No Child Left Behind, passed in 2001, changed the measure of performance from a school's average scores on standardized tests to a measure of how many students scored above a threshold. The emphasis shifted to raising the test scores of every child in every demographic. Failure to meet yearly performance goals can have significant consequences. Race to the Top, passed in 2009, used federal money to incentivize states to make reforms favored by the U.S. Department of Education. For example, in order to qualify for federal funds, New York State adopted an annual professional performance review plan under which teachers and principals are evaluated in part based on the progress of their students. Both of these federal programs use measurements based on standardized tests. One is forced to wonder if we are measuring what matters most or simply measuring that which is most measurable. So where are we, and where should we be? Tony Wagner of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a former teacher and administrator has long been a proponent of change in our public schools. In his 2008 book, The Global Achievement Gap, Wagner lists some of the facts we need to face. Only about 1/3 of U.S. high school graduates are ready for college or career, and it is much lower among poor and minority students. Half of students entering college never earn any kind of degree. 65% of college professors report that what is taught in high school does not prepare students for college. Over 85% of current jobs and over 90% of fast-growing, high-paying jobs require post-secondary education. He lists more, but you get the idea. We might ask why. Let's look at some reasons suggested by Lisa Brady, superintendent of Dobbs Ferry Schools in New York State, and Rob Machiavelli, a teacher-turned-educational consultant at the 2012 New York State School Board Association Convention. They suggest that there are 3 core assumptions about learning that underpin our school system and have for hundreds of years. First, content is scarce. Second, teachers are scarce. Third, learning is local. Let's look at these assumptions carefully. Is content really scarce? Content is ubiquitous and growing much more rapidly than any one person can assimilate. The skill we need is to know how to sift through massive amounts of information to find what will be useful to us. I was amused recently to read in the newspaper a concern about students using online credit recovery cheating by Googling the answers. First of all, if you can find the answer with a quick Google search, I'd say it is a poor question. In any case, knowing how to find answers on the internet is probably a much more valuable skill than memorizing the answer to an apparently trivia question. Secondly, are teachers scarce? There are millions of potential teachers willing and able to share what they know with anyone who is interested. Teachers as conveyors of content are not scarce. Teachers as mentors and motivators who can open a child's vision of the possibilities will always be too scarce. Finally, is learning local? Today's learning networks are global. Students may learn more out of school than they do in school. Brady and Machiavelli illustrate this point with the story of Mark Clausen. Mark grew up in rural Canada. He was interested in cinematography. There were no classes in his school. There were no cinematographers in his community. But there was access to the internet, and at age 12, he joined Vimeo. He had some of the best teachers in the world, and has become an award-winning cinematographer. He has never had a class. Mark is a 21st century learner. Brady and Machiavelli suggest a new learning paradigm based on new assumptions. First, I'm one of millions of teachers, but I connect my students to all the others. Second, my students will learn from me how to learn without me. Third, my students' knowledge combines their skills and their networks. Tony Wagner reports, after years of research and scores of interviews in the private and public sectors, that he has found wide agreement that the skills that matter most, 21st century learning skills, include these 7 survival skills. 1. Critical thinking and problem solving. 2. Collaboration across networks and leading by influence. 3. Agility and adaptability. 4. Initiative and entrepreneurship. 5. Effective oral and written communication. 6. Accessing and analyzing information. And 7. Curiosity and imagination. Wagner asks some very hard but highly relevant questions. Are we teaching these skills? Are we assessing these skills? He cites evidence that by and large we are not. Today's ever-increasing emphasis on standardized tests are a natural consequence of our recent goal changes embodied in No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. But standardized tests largely measure memorized content. Some argue that the harder we pressure teachers and students to do well on tests, the less we actually teach students these essential skills. There are assessments that are more reflective of 21st century learning skills, but they are not widely used. Let's look at some data that reflects where we are, starting with high school graduation rates. The United States belongs to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. This chart shows successful graduation rates from upper secondary education programs by OECD countries. The United States is marked by the red arrow and is well below the OECD average. Next, let's look at the amount of money spent per student by country. The countries in blue do not provide a breakdown of cost between core versus ancillary services, but the height of the bar is the total amounts of spending per student for each country. Note that the United States spends more per student than any other country in OECD, and well above the average. The Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, is a test given every 3 years to 15-year-olds worldwide. The most recent data available is for 2009. U.S. students scored about the same as the OECD average in reading literacy. They scored well below average in math literacy, and they scored about the same as the OECD average in science literacy. U.S. scores have not changed significantly over the past decade. And by the way, Finland came in top overall. Of course, one might ask if the PISA test measures the things that matter most. One final chart helps us answer the question, how much difference does education make? This chart shows the average earnings of 25 to 65-year-old men by education level by country. While the differences aren't as large in the US as they are in Brazil, which is to the far left, still in the US, those with a college degree earn on average almost twice as much as those who only finish high school, and almost 4 times as much as those who did not finish high school. Those who completed post-secondary vocational programs earn slightly more than high school graduates. Moving a little closer to home, let's look at how we are doing in New York State. This chart shows that New York State high school graduation rates are mediocre compared with other states. If we look at ACT scores, recognizing that the ACT isn't taken by many New York State students, maybe only 20-some%, I think, and that it is unlikely to be a good indicator of 21st century skill mastery. Still, New York State is 6th in the nation by composite score. Looking at the cost of public education, New York State is way ahead, spending more than any of the top scoring states and spending nearly twice as much as Washington or Minnesota for nearly the same result. A final cost table compares spending by New York State schools with the national average by category. We spend about 2/3 of our money on instruction, which is similar to the average. Education, as it is currently done, is a very people-intensive process, so the vast majority of the cost is understandably in salary and benefits. Finally, to bring things even closer to my home, let's look at some data for the Scotia-Glenville Central School District in upstate New York. Using data from the New York State Department of Taxation and from the district, this chart shows normalized trends for several measures. Enrollment is a bottom line and has been very gradually decreasing. The green line is the total adjusted gross income, or AGI, for district residents filing New York State tax returns. The AGI has almost kept up with inflation, as measured by the purple line, which is Northeast CPI. The yellow line is the district's annual school budget. Its rate of increase has only been exceeded by the rate of increase in the tax levy, which is the blue line at the top. State aid is the red line, and the effect of the state's financial woes is reflected by the sudden drop in state aid starting in 2010. While school taxes are levied through property taxes, the AGI is arguably more reflective of district residents' ability to pay. One final chart shows the fraction of the total district AGI spent each year in the school budget. This has increased from about 7% in 1989 to almost 11% in 2009, the last year for which I have AGI data. While there are many reasons why public education is so expensive in New York State, the bottom line is that we are paying top price for less than top results, and this is true for the nation as a whole. Now I'd like to look forward. The theory of disruptive innovation, developed by Clayton Christensen of the Harvard Business School and applied to many organizations and industries over a significant number of years, provides what I find to be a compelling context for looking at the present and possible future of education. I would like to first introduce the basic elements of the theory and then show how it can be applied as a prism through which to look at what has happened and is happening in K12 public education in the United States. For details, I refer you to the book Disrupting Class: How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns by Christensen, Horn, and Johnson. For any well-established, high-value product or service, let's look at what generally happens to performance over time. Usually, there's a series of incremental improvements called sustaining innovations. In an existing market, the incumbents nearly always win, at least with their established customer base. But sometimes there is an innovation that creates a competing or displacing product or service at a much lower cost, and which usually targets a different set of consumers who have different measures of performance. The consumers of the new product or service are usually non-consumers of the existing one. In this market, the new entrant almost always wins. But once a new market is established, a series of incremental improvements also occur in the new plane of competition, often at a rapid pace, as the technology is new and opportunities for improvement abundant. When the new product or service gets good enough, because it is much less expensive, consumers of the old begin to jump ship and adopt the new. Eventually, the old producer is out of business. New technology that competes in this way is called a disruptive innovation. Because adoption of the new technology is slow at first until it gets good enough to attract consumers from the old, and then accelerates rapidly until it dominates even the existing market, the adoption rate of the new technology usually looks like an S-curve. As the customer base of the old technology dwindles, not only those businesses providing the product or service usually become extinct, but entire networks of products and services are impacted. Let's take a look at a specific historical example of a disruptive innovation to see how this works. This is me in July of 1963 with my older brother and sister-in-law. This is about the time that I bought a Sony transistor radio. As I recall, it cost about $9. Mine looked a lot like this one, but it was maroon. My parents had a television that looked much like this one. They also had a cabinet radio, but it didn't get much use. This TV cost several $100s and depended on the vacuum tube for its operation. It was a high power consumption device. When a radio or a TV quit, you took out the tubes, went to the local appliance store where there were tube testers, and if you were lucky, you would identify the failing tube, buy a replacement, put them all back into the radio or TV, and then it would work again for a while. The transistor was invented at Bell Labs in 1947. It was a small, low-power device. It was recognized as a potentially disruptive technology, and all vacuum tube companies like RCA licensed the transistor. In fact, these companies spent almost $1 billion trying to make a high-power transistor so that it would fit into their existing product line. By 1955, Sony introduced the portable, battery-powered pocket radio. It was tinny and staticky, and its market was the non-consumer of the existing radio and TV market. That included me, and many other young people who could now listen to their own radio out of earshot of their parents. About the same time, Kmart and the box store came onto the scene. They weren't interested in selling tubes and having tube testers, but they were interested in selling cheap transistor radios, which required no aftermarket servicing. A new product and services network was starting to be created. The transistor radio quickly improved in quality, and Sony introduced a portable transistor television. Soon these devices got good enough that they started to compete with the tube-based products of RCA. The rest is history. There are no tube companies today, and there are no mom-and-pop appliance stores that provide tube testers and sell replacement tubes. Now let's apply the theory to public education. Christensen and co-authors describe each of the major changes in public education that we have discussed as potentially disruptive because new markets were created by the new goals for schools. However, since public education is a monopoly, new providers did not capture the new market, but instead the public education system adapted, often amazingly well. The question of interest to me is whether technology-based learning is disrupting to the current education system. Arguably, even though something like $20 billion have been spent buying computers for schools, this new technology has not made an appreciable difference. However, it might also be argued that schools have treated computers much like the RCAs treated the transistor, as something that had to be adapted to fit into the established way of doing things. There is reason to believe that computer-based learning, along with the World Wide Web, might be a disruptive innovation. There are also plenty of naysayers. Let's look at what exactly is a disruption and then look at the evidence. In many ways, the ideal learning environment is one-on-one tutoring. This maximizes the opportunity to customize the material to the individual learning style of the student, allows the pace of learning to be matched to the student's capacity and circumstances, and maximizes potential engagement of the student. If we could afford to do so, surely we would provide a personal tutor for each child. Notice that these measures of performance, individualization, self-pacing, engagement in the learning process are clearly different from what is measured by standardized tests, which have largely become the primary measure of performance in our public schools. The vision of Christensen and others, including Howard Gardner of the Multiple Intelligences and also of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, is that computer-based learning opens the possibility of student-centered, individualized, self-paced learning with immediate assessment and adjustment of instruction. Content delivery can be more like a game or gamified, possibly engaging more boys in the learning process and diminishing the gender gap. A number of states have virtual high schools, which are currently both loved and hated by students and teachers alike. The plethora of new higher education companies such as Udacity, Coursera, and XEd suggests that disruption at the post-secondary level may already be happening. I am currently taking a 5-week Coursera course through the University of Edinburgh entitled E-Learning and Digital Culture, along with 42,000 other students from around the world. Courses such as this one are currently free, although no one pretends that that is a sustainable business model. However, even when monetized, such courses will cost a small fraction of a traditional on-campus class. One might also wonder who are the non-consumers of public education to which computer-based learning might appeal. There are several answers to this, and the learners are not all overseas in third world countries. First, there are many middle and high school students who do not have access to the classes that they would like to take. Languages, advanced classes in science and math, and increasingly even fairly basic courses. Sometimes this is because the school is small and rural. Increasingly, it is due to the financial crisis that continues to cause school districts to cut programs. Second, there is a rapidly increasing number of homeschooled children nationwide. Technology and the internet has made it significantly easier to provide high-quality, stimulating content to homeschoolers, and there are those who simply do not have access to educational opportunity in a public school, both in this country and abroad. It is important to remember that the current quality of computer-based content is very low compared to what it may become. It is like my $9 transistor radio. Christensen explains that it will take large investments in software to be able to offer differentiated instruction, meaningful assessment, and subsequent content adjustment in a technology-based way. Technology is also making it increasingly easy for anyone with knowledge in a subject area to author content. They may do it for their child or grandchild, or for their cousin, as did Salman Khan of the Khan Academy. This ease of content generation will create material for many different learning styles. As content increases, it will become possible to stitch together customized content, individualized to each student. If you see computer-based content delivery as an opportunity, then you probably see immense potential. Christensen goes further than just making broad analogies. He has applied the theory of disruptive innovation enough times to enough different domains that he has developed a method of quantitatively analyzing adoption to predict the future adoption rates for a technology. When he applies initial data points for adoption of online learning to predict the shape of the S-curve, the result is a prediction that 50% of high school courses will be online before 2020. That is a bold prediction, and one we will not have to wait long to assess. In this presentation, I have shared with you some perspectives on where we are and how we got here. It seems clear to me that something must change in our public school system. Using numbers from my district, K12 spending has almost doubled over the past 20 years to about 11% of the community's gross income. It cannot double many more times. Increases in productivity is what drives the private sector and keeps America competitive in the world economy. Without increases in productivity, we would eventually become a third world country. However, ask your public school officials about their school's increase in productivity over the past 5 years, and it is doubtful they will even understand the question. We must learn to use our resources more efficiently. Teachers are critical to the learning process, but we need to let teachers do the things only they can do, mentor and motivate and touch lives personally. We need to let technology deliver content to each student in the way that he or she learns best, and give students an opportunity to progress at their own pace and be active participants in setting their goals and meeting them. In so doing, we will help them acquire 21st century skills. And in so doing, we may not only significantly improve the experience for our children and prepare them for their future, but we may also find ways to educate more efficiently and control cost. Think about your favorite school teacher. What made them special to you? It is unlikely that it was the way they disseminated knowledge. It is much more likely that they took a personal interest in you and were your mentor. So what can we do? Try out the budding new market. If you or your child has an unmet educational need or desire, see if you can find matching content in the rapidly expanding resources available on a plethora of websites and in computer-based learning materials. See if your school or your child's teacher has enrichment resources they can make available to you. Many of today's textbooks come with access to online material. See what the new market can do for you. In so doing, you may help to make it better. Thank you for listening.